Uh, why don't we start with just an introduction? Tell us a little bit about you.
My name is Casey Byington. My maiden name is Casey Clovis, and I am the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. I currently reside in the Boise, Idaho area, and I work for Western Governors University as an educator.
And what do you teach?
So I teach those teachers that are working towards their elementary education bachelor's or master's degrees.
Hmm. And do you have family there?
Just our family. Mom and dad are about 5 hours east of us. And then my brother, Kelly, also lives over there in Swan Valley. My oldest brother, Jesse, is still in California where we all grew up. And then my youngest brother, Brian, is in the Ohio area.
Got it. So, I mean, do you have an immediate family where you live?
Yes, sorry. Yes, a husband. I'm married to Brandon. We've been married for 16 years now, and then two daughters. I have Abigail and Gracelyn. Abigail is 14 and Gracelyn is 11.
Nice. Good. So tell us a little bit about your dad. Where did he grow up? How did he end up in the military? And when and where did he serve?
Sure. So my dad is Lance Corporal Bill L. Clovis, and he grew up in Paradise, California, which is where I also grew up. He enlisted in the Marine Corps, he tells us, because he got in a little bit of trouble with the law, siphoning gasoline as a young teenager. And the judge told him that he could either go to Vietnam or he could go to jail. And faced with those choices, Dad chose to enlist in the Marine Corps. During that time as well, he also felt like the draft wasn't far off. And so he wanted to be a Marine and he didn't want to be drafted into the Army. So that was a choice that he made at that time. He served in Da Nang, Vietnam, 1968 through 1969. He served with India Company 37, the Marine Corps, and he served as a rocket team leader. So he was on the weapons platoon. His nickname was Rocket Man by his comrades, who still call him that in a very affectionate manner. And he served from August of 68 until he was hurt April 26th of 1969, at which time he left via the hospitals to get back stateside.
Mm. Any idea why he picked the Marine Corps?
I don't. I think that it's that mentality of, Marines are so tough and can do anything. And if he's going to go and fight, then he's going to be the best of the best. And that was what he saw in his mind, was the best of the best. So, still to this day, if you see a mountain in the distance, and I'm a trail runner and, Dad, do you think we could go hike that? It's, yeah, of course we can. I'm a Marine, through and through, it's in my blood. So.
All right. What do you know about his childhood?
It wasn't good. Dad had a rough childhood. He had a really large family, 10 children total. So 5 sisters, 4 brothers, and himself, of course. His dad had a very distinct problem with alcohol and was very abusive to his mom and to him and his siblings. And so it wasn't a hard choice for him, I don't think, to enlist in that sense. Like, he wasn't really leaving behind, a lot in his mind. Of course, he cared deeply for his siblings and their well-being, but his childhood was very, very rough.
Mm.
My mom has 3 brothers, and Dad was very close with them, as well as her mom and dad. We just lost my grandpa last year, and I know that was hard on him because they did have a very, very good relationship of like the father that he, wanted, but never had that relationship with a father figure in his life.
So let's talk about do you remember, I don't know if you remember the exact date, but when your dad showed up at your door 3 years ago, kind of walk me through that day. What were you doing when he knocked?
Yeah, so it was an instance unlike any other in that typically Dad would, call and plan when he was going to come visit. Of course, he would come see his granddaughters often, so it wasn't unusual that he came. But this time he came unannounced. And so immediately I kind of had that red flag radar go up of like, whoa, something's going on here, but I don't know what yet. And he stayed a night, and then the next morning when I got the girls ready and sent them off to school and I was sitting down to start work, he just came into the kitchen area and just hysterically started sobbing and talking about how he could not get some of these memories of Vietnam out of his mind. And he specifically shared at that time an incident of a comrade who he held in his arms, you know, after he had been shot, and watched him pass away. And that was really hard to listen to, but also just to see how broken he was and the pain that he was feeling. It was just emanating out of him. You know, just sobbing hysterically, sharing that he feels like he doesn't have anyone to talk to. He felt like he didn't have any connections left to Vietnam. We had just recently lost a very dear friend of his, Tim Sewards, who had served in Vietnam, but he was Navy, so they didn't serve together. But it was a connection that Dad had, you know, of somebody that was there that knew what it was like. And he had watched him, he had cared for him as he passed away of an Agent Orange brain cancer. And I know that was very, very hard for him. So he talked a little bit about that, you know, about how he didn't have any connections left of people that understood what it was like to be in Vietnam, to serve in Vietnam. He talked a lot about the guilt that he felt for what he had done there. At this time, he hadn't really told me what that was yet. He definitely got into more stories later as we were going through this journey together. But on that day, it was really just me seeing my father, who had always been so strong, you know, in every aspect of that word, just completely broken. And it just left me reeling with thinking like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a Vietnam veteran helper. I have no clue what to do with this. But all I knew was that when he left the next day, I couldn't not follow up with this. I couldn't just sit with this, you know, it was eating at me of like, he came to me, and I know that he came to me wanting something. I didn't know what at the time. But I just knew that something had to be done, and it had to be done fast, you know. And he had called his VA primary care doctor and asked for some help, asked to talk to somebody. And she had sent him the 1-800 number, you know, the suicide hotline number, and made him an appointment that was 3 weeks out, and told him that was the earliest they could see him at the time. Which just absolutely disgusted me, because it was like, you're not understanding the urgency, you know, in this matter. So that was kind of where we left that trip, if you will, of his visit. And then from there after, it was me, you know, I called my youngest brother, Brian, because I couldn't process everything that he had said to me that day, or how he was feeling, or how he looked. You know, it was just so much to take in as his child, to see him feeling the way he was feeling. So I called my brother and just kind of talked through, you know, Dad came over, here's what happened, we've got to do something. And so he and I ended up hiring a psychologist in Idaho Falls, which was close to Dad's area. She agreed to see him the next day, because we just said, you know, this is urgent, like he needs this now. And he went to her a couple of times, but he immediately knew that it wasn't the right fit, because there's something about talking to what he called a civilian psychologist that just cannot handle the war stories, you know? And yeah. So that was when I just started pressing really, really hard. And what I mean by that is, you know, 15 phone calls a day, if that's what it took, to his primary care doctor. And I said, I want him seen now. I want him into somebody. I don't want you to tell me 3 weeks. I don't want you to tell me tomorrow. I want it today. And eventually, I guess what happened is I broke her down, and she connected us with the Vet Center. So not a VA program, but kind of through the VA. The Vet Center has an outpatient program that was 12 weeks in length for PTSD that Dad went through. And that was, he speaks very highly of Darshan Shoki, who he says just saved his life, that she helped him deal with those feelings that he was feeling. And just, you know, he said more than once the quote that it was his last hope. It was his last hope. He didn't see any way out of this at that time.
Now, when he was in Vietnam, and you know, you mentioned the story of, or the memory that he had of holding one of his buddies as he died. How old was he? He was 19, probably.
He was 18.
He was 18. So this was 18. This was nearly 50 years later.
Correct. And that was part of what he just couldn't deal with in his mind. It was like, how have I dealt with it in a pretty good manner, you know, for 50 years. And now all of a sudden, I can't even function on a day-to-day basis. Like I can't get out of bed in the morning. I can't, you know, go through my day. I am so depressed and so sad and so guilt-ridden. And where has that been for 50 years? You know, because he shares that he has little episodes. I don't want to call them little. He has episodes here and there throughout his 50 years where he talks of, you know, laying under the covers of his bed, coming home early from work and having to hide away. And just kind of deal with those emotions that he's feeling, but never to the point of being that he just feels like it's the end of the road.
Yeah. So, excuse me. So you grew up in that environment as he was struggling silently through all of that. What do you remember of your childhood? Did you detect it at all, or was there any feeling at the time that you had that, you know, something's not normal here?
You know, I have to say that I had an absolutely incredible childhood. When I think back to it, mom and dad were so present. I had three brothers. We had so many friends that we, you know, would go to family barbecues. I called people aunt and uncle, this and that, that really weren't blood related. They were just mom and dad's great friends. You know, my dad was so supportive of everything and anything that we wanted to do as his children. You know, my oldest brother was really into skateboarding. He got us tickets to go see Tony Hawk. My second oldest brother loved BMX racing. Dad got him into BMX racing, and every Saturday we were out on the track. It was anything and everything that we wanted to do, he was supportive for. So when you ask if I felt like it was normal, I did. But I also felt like, looking back, like there were times that I felt like he wasn't approachable, I guess would be the best way to sum it up. That there were times that it was like, we need to just be quiet because dad's dealing with some things right now.
You had no
you know,
idea what those things were.
No idea. He didn't even talk to mom about it. So, you know, she knew that he was struggling mentally. But she still to this day doesn't really know the stories that I know. You know, he never opened up about it. So,
and was he working through all of these decades? What was he doing?
Yeah, you know, and it's something that my brothers and I always say, we are just so impressed that we had the life that we did and that he is as successful as he was, knowing what we know now, you know. But yeah, he worked in construction. He was a mason. And then when we moved to Idaho, I was about 12 years old. He worked for himself. He was self-employed mason and did rock work and stonework on homes. Always held down a job, always had an income. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for the majority of my childhood, and dad took care of us, you know, and never skipped a beat. So yeah, definitely worked throughout all of this. But as he has shared, there were just times that it would hit him and he would have to come home early. He would have to call in sick for a few days and, you know, just kind of try to deal with the emotion and bottle it back up so that he could move forward as a, you know, quote unquote normal person would do.
So when you look back on your childhood now, with the benefit of all you've learned over the last 3 years, are there moments that you see differently than you did then?
I would say yes, to a degree. I think there's been a lot of moments throughout our childhood that my dad and my oldest brother butt heads. And I didn't always understand why, you know. And I know that a lot of it is Jesse's personality, but I think that some of it too was dad's demons, that he tried to, you know, I think suffer in silence is the best way to sum it up. He was suffering this entire time, and he just had no way of getting that out or asking for help. So, you know, those kinds of things, yes. But again, you know, my dad and his friends also, I can remember weekends away, camping trips, horseshoe tournaments. There was a lot of drinking going on. And I think that that definitely was something that he did to mask, you know, also how he was feeling, to numb it down, to get through life, and also, you know, to try to have fun. He often says now that every smile, every emotion was something that he had to place there. And that's something really hard to hear as his child, because it just kind of sends you into that space of like, whoa, was everything that I experienced and felt so real, not real to him? And what does that mean? Because there were so many things that were so special to me as a kid that it just kind of makes me wonder, like, how did dad really feel at that time? Was he able to feel? Because that's really often what he says, is that Vietnam stole his ability to feel anything. And, not having any sort of transition back to civilian life after his combat time, that's definitely, if my dad could have a platform for future military, it would be that transition when combat soldiers get home, that they spend at least 6 weeks with a psychologist re-entering civilian life. And that's something that he just didn't get. So, he really didn't talk to anyone until about 2003, when he met with his first psychologist, when he had his first PTSD episode. And gosh, I mean, that's so many years to just try to bottle everything up that he experienced.
Yeah. So in terms of what he experienced, there are a couple of ways we can go about this, Casey. And you've sent me a lot of resources. I can go back and just kind of dig through history and try to piece together kind of what that unit was involved in. And I can just cover that, as a voiceover. But if you're comfortable, and if there are stories that he's shared with you that you think would make this more vivid for the listener, that's another option. And
Sure.
I leave that to you. You can decide which option you'd prefer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk through, there's a couple of things. Again, as I shared with you, my dad suffered a very severe TBI. So his memory is very spotty.
Yeah, TBI is a temporary brain injury?
Traumatic brain injury. Mm-hmm.
And he suffered that as a result of the artillery.
Correct.
That was his wound. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, again, it's up to you. If you want to tell a couple of stories of his combat experience, that would be fine. Or I can just, again, try to piece it together from a sort of general understanding of what his unit was involved in.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to share a few.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me just to go into that now?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So one of the memories that my dad has shared with me that really stuck out to me is he calls it the Christmas Eve ambush. He talks about how, a group of them, he says they were so under numbers. I don't know the exact terminology for that, but they were supposed to have 12 men in a platoon. They often had 6 or 7. That was what they were working with, because so many people were being killed or injured on a daily basis that they were always, shorthanded. So Christmas Eve ambush, Dad shares that they went out on an ambush, which was, day-to-day life for him. It was ambush by day, come back, get a little bit of rest, and out again for a night ambush, every day. That's what he remembers. And so this particular one, he shares that they were out and they were coming back on a very small road to get back to their hill, which was Hill 65 at the time. And he said that all of a sudden they started receiving some fire. The first person in line as they were walking was wounded. And so, as they all dropped to the ground, he says that he just remembers trying so hard to dig into the ground just 3 inches further, just, an inch further, just to get level with the ground, to where these shots that were just firing consistently over his head didn't hit him, and everyone was trying to do that. And he explains this so vividly. I feel like I'm there, and I feel like I'm touching that dirt, and I'm smelling the rice paddy. And he's talking through that. And he remembers that the radio man that they asked called back for help and said, we need artillery dropped. We're being hit. We've taken wounds. We need help. And what they said back to them was that, sorry, it's Christmas Eve. We have a ceasefire on Christmas Day. We can't send support. You guys are on your own. And that memory is something that Dad just falls apart when he shares, because it's kind of summarizes up how he feels the support that they got a lot of times when they were fighting, whether it was from, Commandment on the Hill or the United States government. It just felt like they were put out there to do this job. They didn't want to do it, but they were put there to do it. And when they asked for help, they were told, you're on your own. So he remembers, just trying to get out of that rice field with his brothers, as he calls them, and, finally getting to a spot where they could get down a ditch into the water that was flowing through by this rice paddy, and then being able to sneak back through the water. Luckily undetected. It was night. So he said that, oftentimes that was when the snipers would come out. Night was a really scary time for them. But they were able to follow this water channel back to get to their hill without any casualties and, minimal wounds from that. But again, that's just one of the memories that he shared, that as a daughter and as a civilian, I cannot wrap my head around what that was like for them, and these are all 18, 19, 20-year-old kids trying to understand, first of all, what they're doing. And then, the idea of calling in for support and not getting it, it baffles me.
Yeah. It was Christmas Eve for him too. I mean, that,
correct. Exactly.
That's the, that's the part I don't get. I mean, there's no, I don't know. It just seems particularly harsh given that it was Christmas Eve. Like, why wouldn't you want to help somebody on Christmas Eve?
Well, and like he said too, like, why send us out if you're not going to support us until we get back? Why would they send us on that ambush knowing that there's a ceasefire if they're not going to support us through the ambush till the end, till we're all back in safety? And that was something that I asked him when he first shared that, like, that can't be true, but then some of his comrades that we found have shared the same story, and they're like, it's absolutely true. It happened and it was horrible. And it was one of those things that just kind of left us reeling with thinking, like, when do they have our back, and how much do they have our back? And, they will all, I talked to a lot of Vietnam veterans, and they will all say the same thing, that their brothers in arms were the ones that had their backs. And that's who they trusted more than anything. And I see that again and again, in the stories that Dad shares. Another one would be the night that his very dear friend Coco died. In Vietnam, they all had nicknames. And so that's been a very tricky part of trying to piece together service and find comrades, because nobody remembers each other's nicknames 50 years later, I've learned. I shouldn't say nobody, because when we found Al Marino, he immediately called Dad Rocket Man. He knew, immediately his name by his nickname. But the night that Coco died, this is one that haunts my dad still to this day. He wakes up at night sometimes screaming his name. It's those kind of vivid memories and wounds that are there. So again, a night ambush. He was out with his weapons platoon and a few other guys, probably again a strength of 6 or 7 men total. And he describes it as that they set up a triangle of an ambush. So his friend Wooly, who has passed away, was on the machine gun, and the machine gunner always has a support that helps to carry all of those all of those bullets for that machine gun. And then Dad was sitting across from Wooly, and Coco was right in front of Dad, and they were taking turns sleeping, doing shifts on this night ambush. And my dad describes that it was raining so hard, everything was just sopping wet. They were in the mud. He remembers putting his poncho over himself when Coco said he would take the first shift and Dad could rest. So my dad laid down. Coco was sitting on his knees. And Wooly, detected movement. There wasn't supposed to be anyone around. And so he opened up with the machine gun. The machine gun jammed. And that was where Dad said that the Vietnamese, were able to start firing on them. And Coco was hit. And I think the hardest part for Dad is that Coco kind of fell onto him because he was laying below him. And he just remembers, blood everywhere, just trying to comfort him because it was one of his very dear friends, but also he's still being shot at, and so he had to pull a grenade pin and throw a grenade to take care of the enemy fire. And then at that point, they were able to reconvene. And he said that where they were in the jungles of Vietnam, he did have to put Coco into a body bag and carry him for a few days until somebody could come in. And so that story has been really hard for him. We've tried desperately to figure out who Coco is, to kind of give him that closure. The Vietnam Moving Wall is coming to Idaho this fall, and Dad just really wanted to pay his respects to who Coco is. But again, we only know the nickname. So it's really hard to try and find out, from all of the stories, from talking to others, who that could have been that night. And we were able to find Wooly, but he had passed away 4 months previously. So we never got the chance to talk with him about that evening. But Dad did talk to his brother, and he did say that while Wooly didn't talk much about the war, he did talk about the night that they lost that comrade and how horrible he felt that his machine gun jammed.
I mean, I don't know if we can be of any help here. Maybe, I don't know if sometimes we're able to find folks. I mean, we know it's particularly, as you know, the names on the wall are listed by the date that they fell.
Right.
So, we know what unit he was in. We know the date that he was killed. And I'll see what I can do. Maybe we can find Coco before the wall gets to your town.
Yeah, that would be amazing. We've really looked high and low.
Really?
But again, it's one of those things where, the only person left now is that we're aware of is my dad, and he just doesn't know a name.
Oh, he doesn't know. He doesn't remember anything, where he was from or anything like that?
No, and that's been the hardest part, right? Like, I took all of the India 37 Marines that died between August 68 and May 60. I've gone through all of it extensively. And, my dad's mind is so confused sometimes that now he's like, second guessing, did it even happen? And we went there for a little bit until we talked to Wooly's brother, and Wooly's brother said, oh, that night like haunted him. And that was one of the things that he talked about with me. So I know it happened. I just don't know who that soldier was.
Wow.
But yeah.
Yeah. So
if you want me to share one more, I'm happy to. Like, Dad earned the Navy Achievement Medal for his time when he served on Cobb Bridge, which was an outpost that he said was kind of like sitting up in the tower of Cobb Bridge was kind of like a Sunday afternoon off. Is the feeling that he had there oftentimes. It's one of the very few things that he talks about in Vietnam where I get to see him smile when he thinks back on that. But he earned his Navy Achievement Medal on Cobb Bridge because there was a night that they started to receive some fire onto their hill. And my dad climbed up the Cobb Bridge Tower, which was this really rickety old tower that they built for lookout purposes. And when he climbed up there, he was able to see where they were receiving fire from in a ville that was a little of a ways off. And being the rocket man in charge of the Law rockets, he was able to fire a Law rocket that stopped a lot of harm that would have happened that night. And he was recognized for his bravery with the Navy Achievement Medal for that particular instance. So, those are some of the things that he remembers. When the issue with his latest PTSD meltdown happened, it was a lot of the memories that he was having were of, burning down villas. And then he shares that there was a point in the war where the US government really became about body count. And they wanted to know, is the body count of the dead Vietnamese higher than the body count of the US soldiers? And so they would be required to walk into a ville after it had been destroyed and count body parts. And he said oftentimes people were, this was grandmas and grandpas and young children, that they would have to go in and find, a leg here, a torso there, and try to piece together what that meant for body count numbers, because that was what it really became about. So when he had his latest breakdown with PTSD, it was with my niece, watching cartoons with her. When he looked at her, it was like his mind just started playing this movie reel of all these young, innocent children, Vietnamese children, and the guilt just washes over him. So that's definitely something that he is working on, with accepting that he was there, to do the job that he was there to do, and that it's not his fault that things happened the way that they did, or that body count became a thing, for instance, and just kind of learning how to deal with the guilt that he feels for some of the things that they did there.
What has he told you anything about his the injury that led to his being evacuated from Vietnam?
Yeah. And, we were able to find 2 of his comrades that were there with him that day that are serving as our eyewitnesses for his Purple Heart, which he will be awarded. I know he will. We're supposed to have that decision tomorrow, actually. So, but yeah, so what happened that day, they were just coming off of Operation Oklahoma Hills. They had been out in the jungles of Vietnam for 2 months. It started the end of March, and I don't think Operation Oklahoma Hills officially ended until mid-May, but Dad was hurt on April 26th. They were walking out of the jungles into a valley area that his comrades recall as Charlie Ridge, Dogworth Valley. And as they were walking out, they started to receive sniper fire. He said that, he recalls seeing a big boulder in the open area. And even his comrades say it was so bizarre because there were no rocks in Vietnam, boulders like that. There were rice paddies and there were trees. But the fact that there was this giant boulder for him to hide behind was like truly an act of God, because they just said that that wasn't something that was there. So they started to receive fire. His radio man, his platoon sergeant, Second Lieutenant Mulhern, called in for artillery to help with the sniper fire that they were receiving because they couldn't get to it. And so they called the Hill 65 for a 155 round. And my dad explains that the first round was phosphorus. It's where they're, trying to spot where it needs to be. So when the first round shot off, his lieutenant, the lieutenant noticed that they were a little bit off where they wanted to be. So he said to the radio man, tell them to drop 50 yards and fire for effect. And fire for effect means that it's the real deal this time, right? It's going to be the high explosive. So they fired the 155. By the time it got back to the hill, they fired and dropped 500 yards, not the 50 that were asked for. So Dad recalls hearing the boom, it went off on the hill, and hearing the whistling sound. And then he said that he just knew it was right on top of him. And he curled up into the fetal position behind this rock, and he was hit. And so his memory at that point is non-existent. But his comrades that we found said that he was thrown through the air about 30 feet, his legs, arms, head, everything just kind of flailing until he hit the ground. They ran to him. He was bleeding out of his nose, eyes, ears, mouth, not conscious. At that time, they pulled him away and secured the perimeter to call in a medevac. They said it was about 30 minutes. Dad was kind of in and out of consciousness before they loaded him up. And he does recall awaking on the hospital ship that he was medevaced to, and the doctors standing over him, saying this one has a full body concussion, which is basically what they diagnosed it as at that time, because traumatic brain injury was not a thing in 1969. And that's been one of the hardest things for my dad with his PTSD, is having an injury that no one can see. If you have an arm blown off or a leg blown off during combat, it's obvious to the common civilian, what's wrong. But Dad's is internal, and it's all in his head as far as brain injury. And so that's definitely been really difficult for him to try and explain over and over, what happened and why it's caused so much damage that it has. So yeah, he spent about a week on the USS Sanctuary, and then he, what we call hospital hopped from, Japan to Oakland to San Francisco, and that was eventually where he finally left the hospital 4 months later. Never diagnosed him with anything. When we look back through his medical records, TBI was not a thing. And so they diagnosed him with things like Pepsid ulcers because he was complaining about stomach ache and backache. And they said that he may have parasites. But it's interesting because the doctor notes will continually note, we treated him for parasites, for instance, but instead of getting better, he actually got worse. And so it's like, man, they obviously were treating him for the wrong thing. And again, hindsight is 2020, right? They didn't know. I know that they were doing the best that they could with the information that they had, but yeah, he suffered long-term degenerative brain effects from that he is still being treated for to this day.
Yeah, my head is spinning because I'm thinking about the 5 decades that he went about his life, without acknowledging any of that. And I'm thinking about the story he told of the day of his discharge, where they basically just said, get some civilian clothes on. You've got an hour to be off the base. And the last thing anybody from the Marine Corps ever said to him was, have a good one, man.
Have a good one. Mm-hmm.
And then you're standing there on the street and that's it. Like you're just thrust into this, civilian world after everything
and a world that hated him, a world that absolutely despised the Vietnam soldier. At that time, the USA was not welcoming to them.
No, particularly in San Francisco.
Yes. And so it's not just that they said, have a good one, get off the base, you're no longer a Marine. But then when he walked out, it was, he shares stories. I could never tell anyone that I had been in Vietnam, because if you tell somebody that when you're trying to get a job, they won't hire you because they think Vietnam veterans are crazy. They think they're going to explode at any moment. They think they're going to be like mass shooters. All of those things were said to him. If he mentioned that, where were you at for this year of your life? He had to make up stories. I was traveling abroad. I was, doing something that had nothing to do with Vietnam, because if he admitted to where he actually was, which was in service to his country, then he was spit upon or ridiculed or called a baby killer or thrown out or told that the job wasn't for him. So his anger that he had when he came back and was treated that way by the United States Marine Corps, by the United States government, lasted our entire lives. I don't remember a single time as a child that I recall my dad saying good things about the government. Everything was always a conspiracy to Dad. Things were never safe. I remember as a teenager asking him if I could go to New York with some friends because I wanted to go check out the big city, and him just being terrified of like, no, it's not safe. He just always has that mentality of you have to watch your back. Because that was the pivotal developmental times with his brain. When he was 18, 19, 20 years old, he was in a combat zone. And so, thinking back at things like that, it's like, I understand now why he would say those things to me. I thought they were irrational, but then at the same time, I was like, maybe that's just how parents behave with their with their children, But no, I know now that Dad's worldview was very jaded by what he went through and how he was treated upon his return.
So we talked a little bit. We started down the road of your search for help for your father. And I think where we left off was, 15 phone calls a day, if that's what it takes. And, finally getting somebody on the job. Where did it go from there? Like, how did you end up connecting with the veteran community, for example? I mean, aside from your efforts to get healthcare for your father, how did you also find a community for him? Because I know that was a big thing for him. He felt like he was the only one.
Absolutely. He felt like he was the only one. He knew that he wasn't the only one that had served, but he felt like he was the only one dealing with these thoughts, these memories, these emotions that he didn't really know how to process. And so the hunt for finding others honestly started when he wanted to find Coco. And I was like, okay, how do I find comrades from Vietnam from 1968 that will remember serving with my father, And honestly, it started with a couple of Google searches. I Facebook searched his India Company 37, and lo and behold, they had a Facebook group. They have reunions twice a year with the gentlemen that are still living, and they memorialize on a daily basis all soldiers that served with them that were killed in Vietnam. And I just think the power of these men and the brotherhood that they still have is mind-boggling. It is absolutely, I just can't even fathom being that close to someone that you spent that amount of time with 50 years later. It's just absolutely astonishing. So we found him that group. We found him, Al Moreno, and Richard, I don't want to say his last name because I won't say it right, but his name is Ski. That they were the two comrades that were serving with him the day he was hurt. And so we were able to connect them, and they were able to kind of talk through some of the dots, if you will, of Dad's missing story and help piece things together for us. I obviously wrote to, National Archives and got his records. I got his C file. I started digging for anything, anywhere that I could find that would piece together this story of his service time, but also of his injury. I connected immediately with congressmen. Congressman Mike Crapo, Congressman Senator Risch is also somebody who I've worked with, and then Congressman Fulcher. I've worked with their congressional liaisons from day one because I realized really quickly that I was so naive in thinking that I could just reach out to the VA for help. I, came to it thinking, okay, we'll contact the VA, we'll get his disability set up, they'll help him. That's what they're there for, right? Like, they'll help him, they'll get him what he needs. But what I learned very quickly is that there's a lot of walls that they set up. It's really difficult when you're dealing with a veteran from Vietnam whose records are so spotty and not well kept. And, trying to dig through and figure out, piecing that together to submit for his disability, for instance. I found a couple of Children of Vietnam groups because as I was doing all of this and as Dad continually wanted to share, because I will tell you that one of the things, it's like you opened the floodgate mentality. Like, as soon as I started actively listening and bearing witness to his stories, he wanted to share them, and he wanted to share them a lot, which is good, right? His psychologist said that's a really good thing. But as his child, that is a really hard thing to listen to. To think of the things that he shared with me, and to think that that was my dad doing those things, living through that, was really difficult. So connecting with other children of Vietnam veterans was a huge burden off my shoulders. Being able to talk to other people about what their father or mother had experienced, the idea that they had gone, 40 years without talking about it at all. You'd be surprised to know how many Vietnam veterans have a PTSD episode like my dad did, where suddenly 40 years later, it just hits them so hard that they can't function and have to go through some sort of, professional program or help or whatever it might look like for them. But that is a very common story, and that really surprised me. But yeah, and then, I work for Western Governors University. We have an employee resource group that's centered around veterans, and it just feeling like being around people who are actively serving and or served just makes me feel like it's my people, and I can connect, with them on a deeper level because they understand what it's like to be a child of a combat veteran or a combat veteran. So yeah, it's been a very long journey. It's been 3 years, and we're on appeal number 4 for his benefits, working with the Disabled American Veterans, the DAV, as his advocate. We have been fighting for the last 7 months for his Purple Heart. The thing that was missing from his records in their mind was proof that he was treated by a medical officer and not just a nurse after his injury. And as I shared, he was treated on the USS Sanctuary, which was decommissioned in 1970, and they purged all of the records except the deck logs when that happened. So Dad's records were missing. So that's what then started us on the mission of trying to find comrades for eyewitness accounts. But yeah, and then working with Darshan at the vet center, he still sees her on a monthly basis, just to talk, to see how things are going. He also sees his psychologist who prescribes his medications and such for dealing with his depression and PTSD in an ongoing manner. But, finding people who can relate, people who have been there. He has a friend that he served with coming up to visit him next weekend. And I'm just absolutely thrilled for being able to help make that connection for him. Because again, he hasn't seen anyone from Vietnam since 1969. So we're slowly trying to piece some of these things together. They do cause a lot of anxiety for my father. He feels guilt that he doesn't remember faces and names of the men that he served with. He constantly says that he loves them more than anything in life. He would do anything for any of them, but he can't remember their names. And that's really hard for him. So yeah, trying to find some of those outlets and those support systems has been very pivotal.
That's just a lot to take in.
I agree.
The things that you've learned over the past 3 years, how have they, and the things that you've experienced over the past 3 years, trying to be an advocate for your father, how has it changed the way that you look at government or military people or just humanity in general?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd be lying if I said no. It breaks my heart to think of how many Vietnam veterans who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s at this point are facing the barriers that my dad is facing and have no one advocating for them. And that's the part that keeps me up at night, so to speak. It's like if my dad had tried to do this on his own, if he had tried to get help on his own, continue doing everything on his own as he had done for the past 50 years, he would have given up. And I feel pretty confident in saying he wouldn't be with us any longer, because it was that point in his life where he knew that if he didn't get help, his life was over, and we hear the number, the 22 suicides a day, and we hear of people taking their lives on, the news now and then. But I think the reality of it is that a lot of these, especially Vietnam era veterans, they need advocates. They need people that can fill out the thousands of forms that you have to fill out, and you have to fill out correctly. And they need people that can help them pull their records together, or, set up their doctor's appointments, or gather the information after they have a doctor's appointment to be able to submit it. So all of those little pieces have definitely changed me and have changed the way that I view the VA. And thinking that, like I said, I thought they were there to help, and I didn't think it would be so hard to get him the help that he needed. Dad and I have a meeting next week with Senator Crapo and some congressional liaisons to talk through his Purple Heart process, because that in itself was very discouraging in how they treated me. And the point of it now, with meeting with the congressional liaison now, even though we're pretty confident that his journey with that is done, is because we know that there's others coming behind us. We know that there's going to be another veteran that submits for that award that they earned and that they should have gotten. And they're going to face so many barriers and so many no's. And it is so hard to get up day after day after day and be like, okay, they told us no, but we know that that's not the way it should be. So what do we need to do differently? We're going to approach it from this way this time. And again, it's not something that he could do on his own. It would have stopped a long time ago. He would have accepted the first no, said his explicits to the government and went on his way, because that's kind of how he would have dealt with it. But this whole process with the awards branch, for instance, has taught me that in the military world and in the bureaucratic world, more than ever, you cannot take no for an answer. You have to push forward and figure out what hoops you need to get through to keep the momentum going. We filed for my dad's Purple Heart in September. They denied it on March 2nd. I knew that it wasn't that it wasn't, the way that the story was going to end for us. I knew that he earned that award. And the only reason I truly believe that he didn't get it in 1969 is because his comrades and his platoon leader thought he died that day. They did not think there was any way that he could live after what they saw happen to him. And he never returned to their unit. He went to the hospital ship, and then he went to hospitals until he got home. And when he got home, he disconnected so far from everything that he never found anyone or talked to anyone, so nobody ever knew that he actually survived that. And so, when they denied us on March 2nd, I immediately just had this fire lit inside me that I was like, no, we're not backing down. And I started calling supervisors, colonels, majors. I even talked to the Major General, Greg Olson, who is over the United States Marine Corps. And I just said, I'm not some person who applied for this lightly. I've done my homework. I've done the research. This needs to happen for my father. And we got another board review, and we're supposed to get those results, as I mentioned, tomorrow. So what I've learned is that you have to be resilient, you have to be persistent, and you have to reach out for help. Because I know that not everyone has a family member that can put in the amounts of time and effort and energy that I have put into this for my father. But that's where I think that organizations like the Disabled American Veterans, for instance, or the VFW, those service organizations can really be of support to veterans that are trying for these different types of things. And then opening up to family members. I know that many veterans still struggle with talking about what happened in Vietnam, what happened to them, what their story is. But opening up and talking about that with someone who really cares about you and loves you could be the world of difference. I don't think my dad in his entire lifetime ever thought that he would share with me everything that happened to him in Vietnam. But here we are, and I feel so much closer to my dad today than I have ever felt in my life. And I have always been daddy's little girl, his only daughter, right? But I have never felt the kind of bond that I feel to him now after he has opened up and shared that piece of his life that was so transformative in everything that came thereafter.
I think the amount of grit that you've shown through this process is remarkable. And I just wonder, was that always part of your character, or did you discover it when it was needed?
It's a great question. I will say that my oldest daughter made me a necklace 4 years ago that has the word persistent on it. So it's definitely been an identifying word for me for some time. So I would say that I've definitely had that mentality throughout my life. I've been raised, and this is to my father and my mother's credit, also amazing grandparents, extended family. I've been raised to never give up, and to if I know that something is right, to stand up for what I believe in and what I know is right. And in this particular instance, I know that the United States government should be taking care of my father. He gave his life. His life was altered on the day that he signed up with the Marine Corps and literally said that he would give his life for his country. And he deserves to be taken care of for that, as do all of the other veterans that have served. So that part of me, that passion that lies in helping military connected and Vietnam veterans specifically get what they deserve, so to speak, is very strong. And it's definitely been amplified through this process. The grit, I would be lying if I didn't say there were days that I just curl up into the fetal position and throw the white towel out and say, I'm done. I can't do another day of this. I can't prove to another doctor that this happened to my dad. I can't, I definitely have those moments of weakness of like, what is this all for? And especially with like the Purple Heart, my dad keeps saying, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't even want it. I don't need it. But deep down, one of the things that my dad shared with me recently was that he feels like he never got his end. The Vietnam War has never ended for him. And that hit me so hard, just thinking, he's so right, like Every war, even now, when soldiers come home, we greet them at the airport. We celebrate them. We have parades for them. World War II, we had parades for them. Vietnam veterans got nothing from us. They, as you and I talked, they had to build their own memorial. You know, it's like they constantly had to band together and do what they knew was right. And that is so inspiring to me, to think that these men gave everything, their entire lives, you know, and they deserve the civilian world to treat them in a manner of caring and, you know, providing what they need as they age gracefully, as gracefully as possible. So I definitely, it's been amplified, yes, but it's definitely been a part of who I am. I am someone who does not take no for an answer, and I definitely like to push forward when I feel like it's something that, you know, he deserves to have.
Yeah, it struck me that, you know, the amount of effort that you put into finding care for your father would have been overwhelming for a lot of people. And you not only persisted in that, but you also, in addition to that, tried to find comrades of his. And that wasn't enough. Then you took on the federal government on the Purple Heart issue. Like, you know, you're pretty relentless. I mean, I really think that for a lot of people, just realizing how much care he needed and trying to get him that care would have been more than enough, maybe too much. And I was going to ask you, why did you pick that fight over the Purple Heart? I think you kind of answered it. You know, it sounds like it was more important to you than it was to him.
Yeah, I think that a small piece of me would agree with that. I think that my dad's Marine mentality, if you will, says that, you know, it's not important. You don't need to put this much energy into it. I can't tell you how many times he's told me, just forget about it. You know, forget them. If they don't want to care for me, fine. I'm fine. I don't need anything from the government. You know, I hear those catchphrases all the time. But in my heart, I know that he does need the help. He does need the support. And more than that, he needs the government to acknowledge what happened to him. And he needs the government to acknowledge that by saying, yes, you earned your Purple Heart, for instance, and yes, you qualify for disability. You know, because when they continually deny, for instance, his PTSD claim, if they deny that, then it's basically like them saying to him, you're not really suffering, or you're not suffering enough. And that, in my mind, is just, again, just I'm baffled by that. Like, who gets to decide, sitting in a cubicle somewhere in Washington, D.C., that my dad's not suffering enough? Because a little appointment that they set up, you know, to check where he's at on the PTSD spectrum. Maybe he was having a good day. Maybe his meds were working for him that day. Maybe that interview went exceptionally well. But if you could be inside his home for a week, if you could be, you know, walking on eggshells, like my mom, who I know we haven't talked much about her, but my God, is she a saint? And she has put up with so much, you know, and to think that somebody can say, you know, you're denied PTSD disability, because again, it's hard to prove a brain injury. It's hard to prove that to somebody on paper, you know? And so that's the part that I'd like to say that I like a challenge, but this challenge has been exceptionally daunting. And I am ready for it to, you know, be done and have some light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Because yeah, it's just been a lot of doctor's appointments and a lot of trying to find, you know, the right way to prove to whomever is rating his disability claim that he really is suffering to the degree that he's suffering.
So what's the status of his disability claim now? Is it's still ongoing? Your effort is still ongoing?
It is. Yep. We are on appeal, gosh, probably 3 or 4 at this point. We did the higher level board review appeal, where I had to go and speak before the board, the higher level board, you know, and try to convey, again, what's happening, because oftentimes people ask me when, you know, it's something like that, like, why are we talking to you and not your dad? And I have to say to them, because dad can't handle this. If he got on the phone with you and explained to you everything that he's experiencing and you denied it, that would literally crush him. I have to kind of act as a buffer, if you will. He knows probably 20% of what I've gone through truly to get to the point that we're at today, as far as, phone calls, forms, records, all of that stuff. He probably knows 20% because I have to buffer that from him. Because otherwise, it's not worth it. It would send him into a depressive spiral where he would spend weeks just feeling, like, again, nobody wants to acknowledge what happened to me. And so I kind of have to mask that at this point and only share positive milestones, the few and far between that we get.
Forgive me for not, and you don't have to answer this, but their grounds for denying his claims, is it that, maybe they don't think he's suffering, or they think that his suffering is not the result of his service, or is it more technical, like you didn't fill out this form correctly?
So I think it's the degree to which, they rate PTSD 0, 50, 70, 100. My father is currently 50% disabled, and we are appealing for 70%. Because I don't know how familiar you are with like the ratings, but there's certain things that have to happen. One of them, for instance, being suicidal ideation. If you've ever had suicidal ideation, that's in the 70% category. And again, if I could get on the phone with one of them and tell them about the conversations that I've had to have with my father when he's feeling that way, that would be one way to help persuade them that, yes, it really is this bad. But the way that they judge those claims is through like a third party evaluation, where he just goes in and talks to that psychologist and that person rates it, the severity of it, So it's a severity thing at this point as far as his PTSD goes. He's also service connected for TBI, and he's service connected for tinnitus. He has extreme ringing in his ears from the injury, and also for hearing loss in both of his ears. He's also got a claim to service connect his back, because being the rocket man, he carried those law rockets with him, every day and night. And then also from his injury again, he just has very, very severe degenerative spine disease, caused from service time as well. So there's quite a few parts and pieces that, are kind of ongoing with that process. But yeah.
I'll have to tell you, I have one more question for you. But before I ask it, I kind of came into this thinking this was your dad's story and you were helping to tell it. But the more I think about it, your story is remarkable, right? Just to recap, right? You try to get you continue to try to get your father the medical care that he needs. On top of that, you're fighting the Purple Heart battle. On top of that, you've tried to connect your father to comrades in arms. And on top of that, you're meeting with with your congressional representatives to try and make it so that whoever comes behind you doesn't face as much difficulty as you faced in this process. That is a lot to take on.
Yeah, when you recap it, it really is, isn't it? It's,
I don't think that if I were any one of your three brothers, I would mess with you.
I'll be sure to pass that along. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to summarize into like one sentence what this means to me, but my father has always been a hero in my eyes. Before I knew any of the details of his service time, he just has always been that person in my life that I've looked up to and that I've admired, and that, I want to make him proud. And I think that really resonates deeply in this journey. In that I feel like, this is my chance to really be in his corner and to really help him, realize that asking for help was a brave thing to do. And if that can help one other veteran who's suffering in silence right now reach out and ask for help, then this was all worth it. You know, if one other veteran applies for an award in the awards branch and they look at their claim in a different light because of what we went through, then it was all worth it. Whether dad gets his recognition or not, you know, it's understanding and talking to the people who can make the changes. And that's where I feel those congressional leaders can really be on our side, if you will, to advocate for change that needs to happen. You know, because I don't know if I shared, but the Purple Heart Award, they didn't look at my father's complete military record when they denied it on March 2nd. They looked at his National Archive record, not his C-file record. And some of his doctor notes and records from 1969 were not in the file from St. Louis. And I knew that because as they were talking to me about things, you know, they kept saying things that I was like, wait, you're not looking at the right page. You're not looking at the right page. You can't be looking at the right thing. And it wasn't until I started talking to the colonel in that office that he said to me, are you making up documents, Casey? Are you like pulling these out of a shoebox in your garage? None of this is in your dad's file. And that was so, I don't know, you can say a lot of things, but when you try to demean my character, that was one of those points where I was just like, I cannot believe you just said that to me. You know, absolutely not. They thought that I was falsifying documents to get my dad his Purple Heart. And it wasn't until I could sit down with the general and say, I'm looking at my dad's C file. What are you looking at? And they said, you know, the file from St. Louis, that I said, those are not the same. You don't have all of the pieces. So I had to then send them my dad's C file, which is his complete record. And that was what the board reviewed last week that we should have results on. But again, I just stop and think, how many other veterans have been denied their award because they weren't even looking at their full file? And how many of those veterans got that no and just walked away with it because they didn't know how to reply to that? You know, because when they told us no and I asked to speak to a supervisor, it was not pretty. I was treated very, very poorly by that office. I was called a liar. I was told that the eyewitness statements that I had submitted that were, by the way, notarized, were false, that I had made them up. I mean, you name it. I was told that by the supervisor before she hung up on me, you know? And so again, just thinking of how many people went through that and didn't get the recognition that they deserved really makes me sick to my stomach and makes me want to advocate continually for those that come, you know, after my father's journey. My eyes have been opened wide, is what I could say to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I have two more questions. The
of
more
course.
you talk, the more I want to talk. So you mentioned DAV and one other. What was the other one?
The VFW.
The VFW. Are there any other resources that you think folks should know about that you found particularly helpful that maybe a lot of people aren't even aware of?
Yeah, wow, what a great question. And honestly, that's one of the things that I'm working on with my employee resource group at work right now is getting all of those, they're called USOs, service organizations, into a folder, if you will, so that people can find all of those that are available, because honestly, there are so many. DAV and VFW are just two of the ones that come to mind because I've worked with both of them personally. But yes, finding a service organization is what they're called. And honestly, when you get on the VA website to file your claim, they list the majority of them there to where veterans can choose one that they want to work with. So I absolutely say get somebody in your corner. That's how I view them. My DAV rep, you know, we're a first name basis. I can call him and just be like, Colby, where are we at? What do we need? You know, if we were denied and need to file an appeal, what do we need to add to the appeal before we submit again? And he can help walk me through that. Because one of the things I've definitely learned in this journey is I do not speak military. So, you know, when they're asking me for certain things, when they're asking what, you know, this means or that means, I have to go to Colby, who's my DAV rep, because he's the one that can help decipher that for me. You know, and then as far as support groups, I just highly encourage people to find support groups. I've connected my mom with a spouse group that she gets to talk to other combat spouses and, you know, the journey that they go on. I've mentioned that I'm part of the Children of Vietnam Veterans group. We do a lot of charity work, very service oriented, and then also just trying, you know, share our story, because one of the things I've really learned a lot about in the last year is intergenerational PTSD and the effects of, things that my father went through that maybe I went through silently, but that were definitely there, And so talking to other people that connect with that and can relate to that has just been life-changing for me. We're this month for National Military Appreciation Month in the month of May doing a charity walk and raising funds for Stop Soldier Suicide. So, things like that just help me to feel like being part of a bigger community of people that understand, what it's like. So I definitely encourage that as well. Find a support group and find people that you can talk to. And, for the Vietnam veterans personally, if you don't have somebody in your life close to you, like my dad had me, find somebody through the vet center or through the VA if you have some luck with that, but somebody that you can talk to, because I think that bottling up all of those stories and emotions and feelings, once you can let them out and really talk about them openly with someone that you trust, I have seen a world of difference, not only with my dad, but with who I call my best friends. I tell my husband that my best friends right now are 70-year-old men. I'm best friends with a lot of Vietnam veterans, and I get to, listen to their stories. Oftentimes they just need an ear. They just want someone to bear witness to what they went through. And that oftentimes is just me saying, wow, I can't believe that happened to you. Thank you for sharing that with me. Of course, thank you for your service, and, always welcome home.
All right, last question. Let's bring it back to your dad. How's his life today on a day-to-day basis? Where do you think he is in terms of his healing? And if the current trajectory holds, what do you think his life will be like a year from now, or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now?
Sure. I think it's day by day. I really do. My dad has really great days and he has really bad days still. We're continuing to work on finding the right mix of medications to help treat what he is dealing with. We continue to have him talk with psychologists, both his VA psychologist and his vet center psychologist, just to continually talk about his story. Every time I call my dad, I, block out 2 hours because I know that he's going to start to talk about his Vietnam time, and I need to be, a good listener for that. Because now that he started talking about it, he wants to talk about it more and more, which is really good. So as far as trajectory, I think he's on a good path. I think he has support. We've recently published an article in the DAV magazine related to his story that, went out to the world. And so for him to acknowledge and share that piece of his life and that piece of his struggle and that darkness with everyone was a huge step for him. And it was hard for him to share that with close family and friends because, as you know, he had hidden it for so long. So he still has that anxiety of what will they think of me? I don't want anyone to pity me. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I just want to heal. That's really what his journey is about now. In 5 years, I hope to see him, smile more, enjoy retirement. He's very artistic. He loves to carve walking sticks and canes, and he donates them to the VA and other veterans that might need them. He's very, very artistic with his hands. And so I would just love to see him continue to, create beautiful things that really speak from his soul as far as what he's feeling and his journey that's his own. And yeah, I really hope to see some resolve come from everything that we've been through. My dad has said that if and when he gets his Purple Heart awarded, he just wants them to mail it to us. He doesn't want any sort of service or, any recognition. And one of the things that his comrade Al has shared with me is that we really should rethink that, because he said, how powerful would it be to have some young Marines and a general, present that to your father in a formal manner and maybe provide for him a little piece of that story's ending that he's been looking for all of these years. So I'm hopeful that we'll get to do that soon, and we'll be able to provide Dad with a little bit of an ending, if you will. And then, I just hope to always carry his story of service and sacrifice throughout our family history. It's something that I shared with you. My children are 14 and 11, so we're very careful about what we talk about that Grandpa has been through. But as they continue to get older, I want to be very open and honest with them and help them to help carry on his legacy of what he did and the service that he provided, to our country, so that we can be living free the way that we do, and to never take that for granted. I want our legacy in the next 5 years, to also show our patriotism for, the United States and for the Marine Corps. And I'm hopeful that my dad will continue to heal on his understanding of why things happened the way that they did with the government and with the Marine Corps, so that he can let go of some of that anger and pain and, frustration. It was just, the understanding of why he was treated the way that he was. I just hope that we can continue to close those doors and open some new ones.